And just as a prelude, one might say the EU, just for the sake of our audience, is a legal framework. Circumstances have been created within which there is an acquis to which people are locked in, and gradually there's been a process of increases by the competences all the way through from 1972, certainly through Nice, Amsterdam, Lisbon, Maastricht, and so on, to increase the competences. So the framework of the 1972 Act has remained as it was from the beginning, but the competences have been built up exponentially over all that time. For those who are concerned about leaving the European Union, it's axiomatic that legislation which affects the UK and its citizens by virtue of wishes of the electorate in general elections and its citizens should be the means whereby, through government and through parliamentary government, the laws that should received by our citizens should be made at Westminster and not in the EU, which is the reason why we are repealing the European Community Act 1972 under Section 1 of the Withdrawal Act, and that remains the position as of exit day. So what do you think, across the board, would be the best approach for the UK government to adopt as far as Brexit is concerned in order to deliver this outcome? We have to repeal the 72 Act, it's there, it's the law of the land. Do you have any thoughts about the manner in which the legislation is made, and what relevance does that have to your attitude to Brexit? Do you, in other words, agree with me that basically the most important objective is not just to give the referendum result implementation in law, but also to ensure subsequently that the laws are made by the people of this country and not imposed upon us, particularly behind closed doors, without our being involved in the process, because we won't be at the table, and there's no transcript, no Hansard, and for that matter, the votes of the people who are making the legislation are not even disclosed.
Well, I agree.
In the Council of Ministers.
Well, I agree, and the structure of the Withdrawal Act reflected that. And there are a couple of areas where I think this sort of the rubber meets the road in practical terms. One of them was how we dealt with historic EU decisions and EU case law, where we ended up giving it the status of Supreme Court case law, so that it could in effect be overturned by the Supreme Court, or indeed overturned by Parliament. So that was one element of it. But this is also why, for me, the Chequers proposal was so lethal, because it talked about a common rule book, and it wasn't a common rule book at all. It was a handed-down European rule book, and we had a lot of argument here about, well, it doesn't matter because the industries involved with the regulations are stable and there are not very many new regulations and so on. And I made the point there that the law is not a sort of artificial construct that doesn't have impact. In the case of the Common Rule Book, it gave the European Union control over regulation of new industries, which would determine how those new industries would develop. It would actually dictate our competitive advantage or disadvantage, and so on. So this was fundamental all over the place. And indeed, I mean, the right to diverge argument at the first Chequers was exactly all about that too. So yes, I mean, we are in the same place, Mr. Cash, which is why Sir William. I keep calling him Mr. Cash. It's Sir William. I can get it right. You should have pulled me up.
It doesn't worry me, so I'm sure it shouldn't worry you.
You shouldn't worry. You should have pulled me up. But it worries me because of courtesy. But so I think we're in the same place here, and that's why, to a very large extent, the Withdrawal Act was based on a template very similar to one you designed some time ago.
Yes. And as respects the question of the manner in which we legislate here in this place, that is done in an open, transparent manner, and in the EU, the Council of Ministers does operate behind closed doors, and it does actually make decisions, and I'm asking for your confirmation about this, in a way that is quite often pre-planned. I had an exchange with Ken Clark during the course of the proceedings on the withdrawal bill, and he said actually it's worse than even I was describing, because he said we used to go off to lunch and make the decisions there. And the bottom line is it's essentially an undemocratic process by the standards of Westminster, and therefore that is in itself, I'm asking you, a reason for leaving the European Union, because the manner in which the legislation is made is not as democratic and as transparent as we would regard as being the norm.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, for me, although I'm most quoted about economic impacts, for me, the most important reason for leaving was the democratic reason. You know, we're a country that's big enough to make decisions about our own destiny, and for us that will be an optimal approach in other ways too. So yes, of course that's right, and Ken is right. I mean, if the Commission want to separate you from your civil servants and therefore make you a little more pliable, they may think, they have the decision made over the lunch, which is just attended by the ministers, not by the civil servants even. So no, that is true. The other thing about it, of course, is and I feel like I'm teaching in this committee, teaching grandmother to suck eggs. But the other thing about it is the irreversibility of European law. The effective.
The acquis locks you in.
The acquis locks in. The government never changes. I mean, you can't sack the Commission. I mean, when I sat as the PAC chairman, one of the things we had was the infamous scandal where the Commission resigned in place after the financial fraud. You know, I can imagine a cabinet minister resigning in place. He resigned, but he's staying in his job, taking his salary, just not doing his job. No, ridiculous. So the irreversible nature of the acquis, the irremovable nature of effectively the European government are all things which are antithetical to our traditional democracy.
Which is one of the reasons why, presumably, you would agree that we left the European Union, because the British people understood that. One last question on that before I come on to you, Philippa, is have you had the opportunity to read a book by Sir Paul Lever, who used to be the British ambassador to Germany, and also before that was EU policy director in the Foreign Office for 10 years, and then subsequently the head of RUSI and the Joint Intelligence Committee. So a person of great substance and knowledge and experience, who wrote a book called Berlin Rules. And I don't know whether you had a chance, I gave a copy to Jeremy Hunt the other day, so he'd be fully acquainted with how it operates. And according to Sir Paul Lever, what he says is that no decisions are taken either by the Commission or indeed by the member states without getting the prior agreement of Germany. He also says it is a German Europe, which I mentioned in my speech yesterday, which I referred to when I was making my analysis of my reason for opposing the Maastricht Treaty. And I said that I thought that we'd end up with a German Europe, and he actually specifically says just that. We are more outvoted, according to our European Scrutiny Committee report a few years ago, than any other country.
Twice
and most often we are outvoted with the German participation. So there is a background to this. And I just wanted to ask you a more general question about that, which is, not only do we want to get back, I assume from what you said before, our own democratic decision-making process, that part of that issue is that when you ask the question about control over laws, if we're not making the laws, and we're clearly not and wouldn't have been under this withdrawal agreement until it was killed stone dead yesterday, I hope, then the question is, who would control those laws? And if it happens to be that caucus, dominated largely by the influence of Germany, that's something which the British public really deserves to understand in order to be able to assess the extent to which they would want to leave the European Union. We weren't making the laws. If under this proposed withdrawal agreement we weren't even at the table and it was done behind closed doors, would it not be unbelievable that we would end up by having laws imposed upon us by other countries by majority vote when we weren't at the table and couldn't influence what was going on? What's your reaction to that
Well,
question?
I mean, two things. Yes, I do have a copy of Paul Lever's book. Paul Lever worked for me once when I ran a Cobra for 6 months,
Really?
a County General's Cobra, before he went to Europe. He's a very capable man. And truth be told, I've skimmed it. I haven't read it. I've read about half the chapters properly and skimmed the rest. But yes, his basic argument is that Germany uses its influence to make Europe behave in ways which work to its own national advantage. There's no surprise in that. Not
Not at
all. But it's long been understood that essentially the three dominant influencing factors in the European Union are the Commission, Berlin, and Paris. And if they're aligned, then whatever they're aligned over happens. You know, you had a demonstration today. If you look at the Bavarian press this morning, I think it was the deputy head of the CSU said that Berlin should intervene bilaterally in this process. Now that the British Parliament has thrown out the proposal yesterday, they can't. Bavaria was very exposed to Anglo-German trade. They can't let no deal happen. Therefore, they should intervene bilaterally. We'd be unsurprised to see that happen. The second thing is, in this context, is that this has changed over the course, or not. The facts you've described have been true for my entire time in Parliament and my previous time as a Minister at the Foreign Office. What has changed has been the method or the mode in which the influence has been exercised. When I was a Foreign Office Minister 20 years ago or so, the Germans were very reticent about being seen to exercise power. That's because of the history, understandable, and so they're very sort of backward about coming forward. A combination of things, the passing of time, the enlargement of Germany, have all made it feel more confident, probably, about exercising that power more publicly, and so you see more of it now.
Even assertive? Even assertive?
Possibly, yeah, assertive. Now, and that was, so that's been one direction. A slight backward direction since Mrs. Merkel has become less dominant in her own country. But broadly speaking, yeah, Lever is right. But you know, this is a truth that's understood in Europe, and it's accepted in Europe as part of the price of the peace, stability, and as they see it, economic success of Europe. I'm not entirely sure I subscribe to the last view, but that's how they see it.
Thank you very much.